Hi you guys, so we are in lesson 2 of chapter 8 and we are going to talk about simplest forms soon. But before we understand how to simplify a fraction, you have to understand how to do it by finding the greatest common factor. So we're going to do this whole video on how to find the greatest common factor and show you how that helps you to simplify a fraction. Because in math, when you write a fraction as an answer for any scenario, you always have to write it in simplest form. Simplified form, for example, is shown up here. Let's say I have the fraction answer as 2/4. 2/4 can be simplified to 1/2. How is that true? Well, if I look at a number line, if I labeled the fraction 2/4, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this would be 0/4, this would be 1/4, this would be 2/4, this would be 3/4, and this would be 4/4, or the whole. So 2/4 is right here. Let's say I labeled 1/2. Where would 1/2 go? 1/2 would be right here. So do you see how it's the same amount? 2/4, this amount is the same amount as 1/2, or 1/2. So I know they're equal fractions, but we find out what the simplest form is by finding the greatest common factor. So how do you find the greatest common factor? So let's say I didn't know what 2/4 is simplified to. So you're going to take the numerator and the denominator and you're going to create a factor tree. So this is just like prime factorization, and that was way back in a different chapter, but let's review. What are the factors? Factors are numbers that multiply and give you 2, or numbers that multiply and give me 4. Notice I want the greatest one, so try and think of your greatest factor or fact family that gives you 2. Well, 2 is a really low number, and the only numbers that multiply to 2 are 1 and 2. But out of 4, all the factors of 4 are 1 and 2. So I'm going to pick the 2 because that's the greatest one for 4. Now, let's say I also listed them like this. This is another way, and I prefer this method. I'm going to start at 1, and I'm going to multiply all the way up on listing all the factors that multiply and give me 2, which are just 1 and 2. What about all the numbers that multiply and give me a 4? 1, 2, and 4. Those are all the factors. What's the greatest common? What's the greatest one that they share? The biggest one they both have is a 2. So what do I do with the greatest common factor in order to simplify? I'm going to divide the top and bottom by the greatest common factor, and it will simplify the fraction in simplest form. What is 2 divided by 2? 1. What's 4 divided by 2? 2. And there you have it. That was the simplified fraction for 2/4. And I can find it by finding the greatest common factor and dividing the top and bottom to find the simplest form for a fraction. Okay, so again, why are we finding greatest common factor? In order to simplify the fraction. We simplify it by dividing the top and bottom by the greatest common factor. So let's use another example to simplify a fraction by finding the greatest common factor. Let's say I have 8/32 as my fraction, and we need to write it in simplest form. So we're going to list all the factors of 8 and 32 and see which is the one that they share that's the biggest. Now, the best thing for you to keep track of is that 8 is the highest I can go and 32 is the highest I can go, because I'm doing numbers that multiply up and give me my 8 or my 32. So I'm going to start at the bottom and go to 1. So 1 times 8 gives me 8. 2 times 4 gives me 8. 5, 6, and 7 don't multiply to 8. So those are all my factors of 8. Now, remember that they're going to share one of these. I just need to figure out which one of these will also be here. I don't have to list all the factors. I can just find the ones that match here, right? So 1, I know 2, right? What's 32 divided by 2? And if you don't know, just like I'm doing, you're going to go ahead and find out. It's 2 and 16. Well, I know 16 is not going to be the greatest common factor because 16 is not a factor of 8, right? Okay, let's think what else. What other numbers multiply and give me a 32? How about 4? What's 32 divided by 4? Because I want to try 4, because 4 is up here. And let's see if they both carry a factor of 4. What times 4 gives me 32? It's an 8. And 8 times 4 is 32. So I have a 4 and an 8, okay? Now, why am I going to stop? I'm going to stop because look, they both have 1, they both have 2, they both have 4, they both have 8. And I have to stop at 8, which means I don't need to do any more factors for 32 because the biggest one possible sharing, the biggest common factor is going to be 8. And that's why I always start with the smaller number because I have to stop at 8, which means one of these factors will be the greatest one that's listed up here. And it happens to be 8. 8 went into both of these numbers. So if the greatest common factor is 8, I'm going to divide the top and bottom by 8, which will give me 1/4, which tells me that 8 over 32 simplifies to 1/4. All right, you guys, so those are just a couple examples of how we find the greatest common factor in order to simplify a fraction. Make sure you do the steps that make sense for you when you're listing out your factors. Remember, factors are numbers that multiply together and give you a number. All right, you guys, go ahead and watch this again if you need. Otherwise, check out my next video on how to simplify fractions.